So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's discussion on breaking down barriers to trail running. My name is Kiera Smalls, she, her pronouns. I am the Executive Director of the Running Industry Diversity Coalition, also known as RIDC. And I am super excited to talk to this esteemed panel today, and you'll get to know them in a minute. Also wanted to say thank you and hello to Patagonia's trail running team. They are a big reason that this discussion is happening. And so want to shout them out as well for their support and their desire to have these discussions like this. And so we'll get started with some introductions of our panel. And then we also want to get to know who's here attending, and you can write in the chat. Just be sure to make sure everyone can see it and not just the host and the panelists. So panel, let's start with the easy question. Your name, pronouns, your land acknowledgement, and your location area where you're located. So I can actually restart so that I make sure I do my land acknowledgement. So again, Kiera Small, she, her pronouns. I am on Lenape land in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my favorite trail is the Wissahickon Trails in Philadelphia. And I'm the Executive Director of our IDC. And I'll pass it to Peyton.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Peyton Thomas. My pronouns are she, her. I am a member of the Patagonia trail running team, and I'm currently on Arapaho and Cheyenne lands in Boulder, Colorado. And I'll pass it to Brodie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lionel Brodie III. My pronouns are he, him. I am coming to you from Philadelphia, same as Kiera, from Lenape lands here. I'm the founder of Original Propaganda Athletic Club, and also a Lululemon run ambassador in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Very happy to be here. Very happy to talk and engage and learn from everyone. And I will pass it to Rahaf.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy everybody's here. I see some names I'm familiar with. That makes me excited. I reside about 20 minutes outside of Detroit and Farmington Hills, Michigan. I finished the Abbott World Marathon Majors, and having been born in Syria, I'm the first Syrian to do that, and the first hijabi Muslim American to be featured on a cover of a running magazine in 2016. I went public with my profile in 2015 on Instagram. I was so sick of the way things were. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3 kids, late runner, and yeah, happy to be here. And the land I reside on, and forgive me for mispronouncing it, is Anishinabeg. And yeah, thank you, everybody.
I think that just leaves me. So yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Martin Johnson, joining from London in the UK. I'm a father of 2, trail and ultra runner, Patagonia ambassador, and original community member of Black Trail Runners, which is a community and campaign group that was set up back in 2020 to increase representation and participation and access for Black runners in trail running in particular. In the UK is National Windrush Day, which is set up to sort of honor and sort of acknowledge the contribution of the Windrush generation and their ancestors who arrived here in the UK in 1948. So I wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge that. I just think it's quite poignant that this call is happening today. I think it was by accident, but yeah, so I'd like to acknowledge that today.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So this next question, would love to know from you your first experience or introduction to the trails, for whether walking, hiking, or running. Do you recall your first introduction? Who introduced you? And any question is open for anyone on the panel.
I'll jump in. I was introduced to the trails. Wissahickon is my favorite trail. We're both from Philly, so I felt like I have the cheat code. because you're aware of almost everything I can say. But a mutual friend of ours, Eric, introduced me. He's a big time trail runner, and they were having, or there used to be a race. I don't know if it still exists. It was like a 5 mile or a 10K in the Wissahickon. And when I first started running, I wanted to be the complete runner, right? Like I wanted to have the full, obviously the road running, but then also the 3 T's, treadmill, track and trail. So I signed up for this race thinking that since I had already done a half marathon as my first, I just jumped right in half marathon, and that I could handle this distance. And it was the most humbling athletic experience of my life. Just, one, being away from like my headphones and like the normal noise that I like to surround myself with when I run. But then also it was one of the first times since I started running that I had to stop and walk a lot of the technical parts of the trail. And there was this part that's, I guess, affectionately or unaffectionately known as Mother in the Wissahickon that was like, I don't even know how to describe it without changing the content of this chat from PG to rated R NC-17. But it was quite an experience. And it just, as a person who doesn't really step out of their comfort zone too often, it was, it was one of the most humbling and, refreshing things sorry, my dog is always joining Zooms, that I've ever done, because, nature is a beautiful thing, trial by fire. And, I don't know if I've looked back ever since.
So my experience of trail is kind of new. I'm still a road runner, but every once in a while I head out to the trails, either to hike or to just run it to clear my mind. I love the way it makes me feel. Just so isolated from everything and everyone, especially my kids. I can go out there and just hide, without having my name being called like 100 times a day. And actually the trail that I run in is the West Bloomfield Trail. It's about 10-minute drive, 10-15 minutes. And I've probably spent hundreds and hundreds of miles on that trail. I've run a 20 miler on there. I've trained for all my marathons on it. It has so much meaning for me. I will say that it's really, really easy. It's flat. It's crushed gravel. It goes out into like the woods and trees and creeks. It's so pretty, and it's easy. So that's one of them. Another one I have is shorter but harder, out here right by my house, just a block away. And that one is challenging. And that one I kind of jog, walk it. Again, I use it to hide out, or I take my kids hiking on it. So yeah.
I guess I can go. So my first time trail running was actually in high school, training for cross country for my first season. And I was not a runner at all before joining cross country. I was playing volleyball and I don't know why I signed up, honestly, for cross country. It was mostly just to hang out with one of my friends. And it was a really interesting experience, just really running with people for the first time, and it being very conversational, because before then, I just thought that running was like a thing that you just sprint as hard as you can, and then you stop at some point and you're done. So it was a really new experience. And what's funny is that my first season of cross country really, I guess, primed me for like big trail running and ultra running, because cross country races in Georgia are only a 5K. And I would stop and walk in the middle of these 5Ks because I was just done. I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. This sucks. But it really primed me for ultra running, because you get to do a lot of walking and a lot of hiking. So I sort of think back on that a lot. And I'm like, well, I guess I was just preparing myself for this. And my favorite trail, well, I have a favorite trail in North Carolina where I've lived for the past several years, which is the Linville Gorge Wilderness Area. It's this beautiful loop and is pretty much like a green Grand Canyon, essentially. But then I recently went back home to Atlanta, is where I grew up, and just sort of rediscovered some of the old trails that I ran on as a kid. And so Vickery Creek is another one of my favorite trails because I was on that all the time. And it's now part of the National Preserve now. So it's protected under the National Park Service now, which is great.
Awesome.
Yeah, so my introduction to trails. So I grew up in London, and yeah, we're not blessed with huge trails here, but actually we've got quite a green city and lots of ancient woodlands. I played a lot of football growing up in my teens. I began running in my 20s, but it was very much sort of road running. I'd race road marathons, half marathons, and I'd train maybe 3 times a week, but I was often drawn to the woods. But at the time, I didn't really make that connection and think of that as trail running. It was just another route in my training regime. But I think I've always been drawn to the trails. But it wasn't until fairly recently that a friend of mine who I was working with would go on about her husband who's doing these mountain ultras and go on about this trail racing, which was just not something that was, again, growing up in London, it just wasn't something that was on my radar. And after a bit of persuasion, he made me sign up to my first trail ultra, which ironically was along the Thames Path, a 50-mile along the Thames Path. And it was horrific from start to finish, but it clearly unlocked something in me. So it's probably worth noting that was a white friend that introduced me to trails. And that's where that was back in 2017, and that's when my love affair with trail and ultra really kicked off, and when I think I started to begin to identify as a trail and ultra runner, I think.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. I'm thinking about my first kind of intro. I remember, in like middle school and camp and doing a trip and traveling to a trail was kind of my first introduction when I was younger. And that was like walking, hiking. And then as an adult and around 2014, 2015, already got into road running and doing a handful of races. And then when I first moved to Germantown in Philadelphia and realized that I was around the corner from a trail, I said, okay, let's try to run. And so that was my first experience of that feeling that it's completely different, right, from road running, and a lot of work and a lot harder, but it felt such a huge accomplishment to be able to run on gravel and even to be able to kind of go into the hills at some point. So my first introduction was camp, but then to actually start running it was a few years ago through our work in Philadelphia with Strides. So thanks everybody. And I see we have folks joining from all over. And I guess really quickly, how were you first introduced to trail would be our question for the attendees. You can leave it in the chat. How were you first introduced? So we heard, right, mutual friends, camp, location, and nearby, and so just saw it and wanted to join it. So we're very curious from you all how you're first introduced to trails. And so these days, to the panelists, how are you spending time on trails? I heard there are some races and some walks hiding from kids, from the kids sometimes. And so let's say this week, have you been on the trail yet? Are you heading out? And anyone can start.
Yeah, so I've been out on the trails this week in my local woodlands here in London, often fitting my training runs around work. I'm a father of 2 boys. I work a day job, and yeah, so I often fit in nice lunchtime runs to my local woods. And also this weekend, as mentioned to you guys before we joined the call, I'll be heading out to Milan for a screen of Run to the Source, and also for running up for air chapter out in Milan, which I'm really looking forward to. So some new trails that I'll be experiencing there. I think that's one of the appeals of trail running, is that there's this endless playground of trails out there to go and discover. So yeah, always up for discovering and experiencing new trails wherever possible.
Awesome. One more response from anyone? Okay. I was just on the trail this Saturday. I have a friend who is encouraging me to try to run up one of our really big hills nonstop. So we were there this Saturday, and I'll be there again this weekend, this weekend as well. So we've been practicing my ability to get up this hill nonstop. So we talked about the different, our different entry points into trail running, and we also know for a lot of people that trail running is not as accessible as it may be for us on this panel. And so let's get into why that may be. With a particular focus on underrepresented groups. That's obviously why we're here having this conversation. So one thing I wanted to note is when we were promoting this panel, there was a comment exchange on Instagram, and I'm going to read it, and then I want to get into the barriers of trail running or access to the trails. So someone commented, "It does not matter where you are and who you are. If you have shoes, that's all you need." And someone else said, "All you have to do is go outside and it's accessible to you." And then someone asked, "Well, I want to learn from you, what are the real barriers?" And someone replied, and this someone is a white guy, he said, "Time, money, healthcare, housing, basic needs, childcare, threats from others while running." And the other person responded, who was a white woman, and said, "Sounds very familiar to my own childhood, actually." And then someone followed up and said, "Struggles are common. Struggles exclusively because of race are unique." And so what do you say to people who say anyone can go out on the trails? All you have to do is go outside, or these barriers aren't real. Let's start there.
I was actually thinking about this morning. I feel like one of the and again, I'm just speaking from my own vantage point. I wasn't elected, ambassador to all BIPOC people in Philly, or I would probably live in a bigger apartment or house. But for me, when I was growing up, there's, like in Philly, we talk about the Wissahickon. I know there's like Pennypack Trail in Northeast, and I think there could be a small one, like in Cobbs Creek Park. I don't know how safe it is in that particular park, but I think one of the things that I thought about when I was growing up is that the proximity to trails are limited if you are, a Black male and you're from an urban area. You know what I'm saying? Like, even now where I live in the suburbs, I could just walk outside and, my neighborhood is my playground. There's a trail across the street. So I have easy access to, to the workout, to the experience of, running or trail running, being on a trail, walking on a trail, hiking on a trail. And I didn't have that when I was a kid, or, and I'm not trying to downgrade the way that I grew up. I grew up, in a middle class home with mom, dad, Catholic school my whole life, the whole thing. But I didn't necessarily have the means to get to said trail, which I think is also, probably one of the, the main, like, first primary barriers I could think of. Can you access the trails? Do you know where they are? When I was younger, nobody really in my neighborhood ran. So I didn't even really realize that like running was a sport that I could be. We all knew basketball, most of us sucked. We all knew football and baseball, and all of us sucked. But, like we didn't look at running as something that was for us, and especially not trail running, because we didn't know where the knowledge of trails didn't even exist until I was well into my 30s. And I've been living here my whole life. So just a little small thing, like I can dig the whole, like, the proximity. I'm blessed now because I can walk across the street and hop on a little trail, or I can hop into my car and like drive to said trail anywhere USA. But when you're younger and you're from, at least where I'm from in West Philly, there are no trails, and like the trails or parks that do exist, you're not going into those at any time of day. So for safety concerns, so I think proximity and safety are like two like very early barriers that people face, you know, some people in underrepresented communities could face.
Yeah, I agree with Lionel. Like a lot of that is mostly we weren't introduced to it at all, especially being a child of immigrants. When my parents come here, they didn't automatically think, hey, where's the nearest trail? You know, they were thinking, how can we continue our education for my father? And how can I provide for my family? And that was the main points from an immigrant standpoint. First and foremost are those things rather than recreational. And recreational, unfortunately, that stuff was not really introduced to me at all. You know, it's sad kind of because I wish I had gotten into it so much earlier in life, you know, for a lot of reasons, but most of it is, I think that, you know, a lack of education, I think within our own communities is really lacking. We need that. We need to tell our own communities like, hey, you know, get out there, not only for representation, but really for mental health, you know, for our own communities. Another part of that and why trail running is lacking in our communities is just financial reasons. Like, again, being a child of immigrants, my dad is not going to spend $1,500 on a trail race. That's just not going to happen. You know, he was barely making ends meet in Detroit, living in Detroit, trying to get his PhD and trying to get his education and trying to fix his citizenship status and all that kind of stuff. So automatically, that's definitely not his first priority is, hey, let me go out on a trail and take my family with me. You know, it's just, it was hard. It wasn't, you know, growing up was pretty hard. So it wasn't like that at all. It wasn't easy every day, go out on a picnic to a trail. So it's, you know, definitely in that aspect. I think financial standpoint is also a major thing that a lot of race directors have to reconsider or consider.
Yeah, Peyton or MJ?
Okay, I was going to agree with Rahaf and Brodie. I feel like my experience growing up was pretty similar to Brodie's, and then for Rahaf, I totally agree. I mean, I didn't even really know that there were actual trail races, honestly, until after I graduated college, but I had had this experience of running on trails previously, just doing that for training, but I would not have had any access to that knowledge had I not joined like a group that was already established. And I think that that is a huge thing that is lacking in a lot of BIPOC communities, because my family as well has, like, no one runs in my family. I'm the only one and everyone thinks I'm crazy, and they're like, oh yeah, and it's like, how do you know where to go? How do you know how to do this? And I'm like, well, I had people tell me, or like I had a lot of people help me out and figure out what resources I need to be able to do all of these things alone, especially because a lot of my running experience with trail running specifically has been me venturing out alone, which can be really daunting to a lot of people. And so having a good group of people, even if it's just like one other person, is super helpful to be able to sort of make that leap. And I have lived in places where trails are extremely inaccessible, especially mountain running. I'm really fortunate now to have moved to a place that is probably one of the most accessible places on the planet in terms of trail running. But before, I had to drive like 5 or 6 hours to get to a good trail that was runnable and long, and also have people who would do that with me. So I think, yeah, having a good group of people that is knowledgeable as well, that's like open and willing to take on someone new to the sport and slow down, because also some groups will just like leave you behind, and that's not very helpful for anyone. Yeah, a good community of people, I would say.
Yeah, and I think very, very similar picture here in the UK. So inevitably, a lot of trail races take place in rural spaces here in the UK. historically, they've been very much white middle class spaces, and historically quite hostile places, and places where there's a lot of intolerance for Black ethnic minority people here in the UK. I think the 2011 census here said that 97% of BAME communities live in urban areas, so in the cities. And when you sort of look back, that's often been by design as well. Policy has dictated that that's the case, right? So there's that physical barrier, as in proximity to the trails, but also there's this sort of invisible barrier that's been built up over hundreds of years of history, where these spaces are, people of color don't feel welcome and safe in these spaces. So there's that psychological barrier that needs breaking down as well. But absolutely, I think we've already sort of covered that whole representation piece. So Black trail runners, we often say you can't be what you can't see, and just that lack of representation, of role models, of people that have come before us representing on the trails is just not something that's often on our radars. In the film Run to the Source, if anyone's seen that, we talk about that disconnect with people of color and the outdoors for generations of being sort of confined to these urban areas. And I think what we're seeing now is the work to sort of break down or reconnect with the outdoors and feel that sense of belonging in those spaces.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm looking at the chat too, and I just want to share two comments that came up related to this. Maria, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Maria Lacey says, I think there is also a lot to be said about the mental barriers of overcoming historically negative associations for African Americans with woods, backcountry, rural areas, being seen as a threat while being a target of racial violence. Jan Harris says, I think a lot of people forget that minorities in the US were restricted to where and which parks they could visit. So families did not go and pass down that lack of experience to the rest of us. And there's definitely more comments. And so, you know, when before you all answered, I had shared that Instagram comment of someone saying, well, what are the barriers? Or, you know, or people saying it's simple. All you need to do is go outside. And we know that it's not that simple, right? And so I would hope and encourage anyone who's on this call, who before this call, you had a thought of all you need to go do is go outside, that these discussions and what's coming up on this call tells you and shows you and proves to you that it's not that simple. And so thanks everybody for sharing that. I do want to acknowledge we're kind of halfway through this hour. And so if anyone needs to take a sip of water, stretch, all of that, please do. This is my yoga teacher background coming out. If you need to take a deep breath, please do. So heard about a lot of things, right? Proximity to trail, you know, the history of who the trails are for and who it's not for, seeing who's in the trail, right? Even if everyone can think about the last time they've been to the trail and you're passing people walking, running, who do you typically see? What's the dominant, you know, group that you typically see in the trails? Peyton, you mentioned groups that were already looking at groups that are already established, and how there needs to be more groups that are helping make trails more accessible. And so that was, just wanted to recap kind of what we just talked about. And so where do we go from here? First in the chat, what are some other barriers the industry needs to keep in mind? So we prioritized, you know, access during the kind of like the responses we just had. But what else should the industry keep in mind in terms of barriers for underrepresented groups in trail running?
Financial, like I said before, I think that's a big thing. Like when I first started reading about how much these trail races cost, like no way would my dad ever let me spend that amount of money for a trail race. I think you know, just growing up, it wasn't just part of something that we could afford. I think having that, a little more accessible for underrepresented communities is helpful. I think maybe applying for scholarships, applying for maybe a different tier of the race, like you won't get a medal or you won't get a shirt or whatever, just come, or maybe reaching out to, we've had so many here in Michigan, influx of refugees, whether from Afghanistan or from Syria or from, everywhere. And it's like, reach out to those groups or whoever's supporting a refugee organization, and, advertise to them, maybe it's something that they need after, enduring all that they've been through. It's really easy to do. I don't know why brands and organizations and races don't do that. It's really, it boggles my mind. Like there's so many local races that go on here, and where I live, it's pretty diverse, but yeah, the races are still all white. And I just say to myself, if you can just reach out to our communities, and say, hey, would your community be willing to come over to this race? We would love to have you. And maybe release a diversity statement to make it more, just more like, friendly. I think all those points need to be taken into account.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Rahaf. And even I think what would be a next step is also providing more run opportunities in that community. Like instead of asking people to come, because I don't know how long of a drive it is for people to get from your community to other places in Detroit to do this race, but maybe asking race directors or event holders to put on events in this community and make it, like, bring it to them, show them what it's all about, even if it's, road running, while I believe is maybe not as enjoyable as trail running, is so much more accessible to people and is a really good entryway. Like that's really honestly the way that I got introduced into running as a whole, is through road running too. So yeah, just bringing more events to people that maybe don't have a financial cost at all, even if it's just like a weekly run social, something like that, where people can just show up and do a bunch of different paces.
I think that if I can jump in, I think the financial point that everybody's making is like huge and sometimes, for some reason overlooked. For all running, not just trail running, but like when you jump in and everybody says it's easy access and all you need is like a shoes and shirt and bottoms, but then once you start to get into running and like the natural evolution seems to be you start to run races, and then like I haven't been running for a long time. I've been running for like 11 years, but when I first started running, it was like whatever shoes I had and shorts and t-shirt, and I was out the door. And then as you start to get into it, you realize, or you're marketed to by brands and by your friends who are, also into running or whatever, that you need a training shoe, and then you need a long run shoe and a shoe for speed workouts, and then, like a track shoe and then a racing shoe. And this is just for road running. So unless you're jumping into just trail running, as your primary, when you get into the trail running piece, there's different levels of trail running shoes and listen, I don't knock the brands. Kiera knows me. I love to shop. I gotta get a good job. I've budgeted, so the money that I would spend on Grubhub and DoorDash, I spend on clothes and sneakers. So I prioritize getting fly. Like that's my main sport. Like running is, I would never run again and just dress like a runner and be totally happy. But when you go to brand X, there's your running shoes and your trail running shoes and your running apparel and your trail apparel and your running accessories and your trail accessories. So it starts to add up, and none of it's cheap if you want any sort of quality. And then once you start getting into the actual races, I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago about, minorities, BIPOC people, and why they don't run certain races in Philadelphia. And she also she lived a little bit in London, and it's expensive. Like if like I just got engaged, and I would love to run a race every month from now until you know, next October, but I can't do that and I got a job, you know? So I've only did the one trail race, so I don't know how expensive they are, but I'm sure if it's like road running, as you start to go up in distance, they start to go up in price. And so, I mean, there's huge races in Philly that are 10Ks that are $85 for, you know, you get a t-shirt, or how many more t-shirts do you need? You know, so I think that financial piece is important. And sorry to run on, but I was thinking about this when, you know, I think both Martin and Rahaf were talking, and even Peyton, when it comes to the safety piece. I'm a bigger Black dude, and so one of the barriers for me being on the trail is a lot of times if I'm running in the street by myself, and I live in the suburbs, so if I'm running towards someone and if they're threatened in any way, shape, or form, they can cross the street. You know, I can cross the street. There's like a lot of different vantage points for me to get out of the way. But some of these trails are narrow. So you see me in all Black running towards you and you don't know me, you know, like, but you know what you've seen in the media, you know, what you've seen on the news, you know, what I could be listening to and rapping out loud. And, you know, like, who knows where your level of, you know, of comfortability is, and who knows how comfortable I am, because I tend to run and I see people, you know, women especially, but, you know, normally when I see people, I cross the street so they don't feel threatened by me, and I'm preppy. So I'm just, you know, I'm just thinking about that. And again, this is me with no coffee, so I'm just gonna sort of ease out
Oh,
and let
glad you
somebody
shared
jump
that.
back in.
Glad you shared that. So I'm looking at the chat and just a couple of things that are coming up. Chris Lampencraw said, a friend of mine, a professional Black man, will not run on the trails after being stopped and threatened from two white people who thought he was a criminal. It was not only the trauma, but his daughter asked him to never run on the trail again. Jasmine Sanchez says, there is also a lot of racism embedded in names of trails, parks, and public lands that have been established for decades. Another barrier that makes the outdoor unwelcoming for so many.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Obviously agree with everything that fellow panelists have said about sort of financial barriers as well, but there are a lot of Black people who have money to spend and are looking to race, right? But they're still not coming to these events. So that tells you that the problem is bigger than that. So I think brands have got a lot of work to do in terms of the way they market their products, the way they design their products. That could be color choices, that could be fit, you know, the models they use with their products and their events. And I think that comes with more representation from within the brands across all levels. So more Black designers, more Black people in the organization of these events, because there's that lack of understanding of you know, that lived experience and what it is that Black and brown people are looking for in events. I think there's an element there. I also feel as well, although this is probably not as bad in trail running, and it's something that I think is improving, but I think much of an emphasis on performance, which is a massive turn off to people that are new to a sport like trail running. There's pre-marathon, break down that perception and those barriers as well from brands.
Yeah, MJ, could you repeat that last point? We were so close, so close.
Oh, I dropped out. I don't know which point I dropped out there, but yeah, I just think Brett, there's a lot more work to do around that emphasis on performance and breaking down that barrier as well. You know, on that issue of sort of this. September. Oh.
MJ, you may have to write it in the chat.
Okay, I'll go with the chat. I'll drop it in the chat.
Because we definitely want to make sure that we capture it.
Okay.
It's breaking up right now. This is looking at the comments in the chat. Thanks everyone for adding your questions, comments, concerns, compliments. Because this, although we have this esteemed, fantastic panel, it's going to take all of us, right, to educate ourselves, to share resources, to share best practices, to call in. At RDC, we don't say call out, we say to call in and hold accountable the running industry. So we just covered a lot. It's 1:45. The cool thing about what has transpired on this call is that we've heard recommendations and resources throughout your answers, and we also see them in the chat. But if we just dedicate a few more minutes to kind of like, resources and things for people to consider and do after this call. So I first want to talk about individuals. This includes whether you're just an individual runner or you're part of a run club or you work at a brand or event, right? As individuals, where can we go to learn about and prioritize racial justice, racism, our biases in order to do this work, right? Because we can start with, here's what you can do with pricing, here's what you can do with access and promotion, but there's a lot of bias, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of, we don't know what we don't know. And so where can people start to better educate themselves or to be more, I don't want to say be more comfortable, because we're going to it's uncomfortable having these conversations, but be able to sit with the discomfort of acknowledging, understanding the kind of the racism and that type of biases that hold us back from doing this work. Let's start there.
Well,
resources or just things for people to consider.
This isn't necessarily specific to running in any sort of realm, but it's more so focused on the history and stories of Black people in the United States. It definitely doesn't cover a full history of all minoritized people in the United States, but there's this one organization that I just became associated with called the Civil Conversations Project, and it's about exactly what you were talking about, Kiera. This really awesome man, Wayne Hare, he goes around the country and speaks with mostly National Park Service people, but he's also started to expand to different people associated with outdoor events, mostly focusing on skiing right now, but he's looking to expand outward, where he just creates these group discussions about uncovering Black history and what that means in the context of the way we think about America and the lived experiences of Black people. And I think that can be expanded to really any realm of existence, not only running, because running is sort of a really privileged thing to be doing, especially in the context of like when we're thinking about racism. But he has a Substack, and we constantly put stories on there as well that highlight this uncovering of Black history in the United States. And then I think just overall really looking at not only Black stories, but BIPOC stories. And so most of what I have experiences is uncovering Black stories in America. And so I mostly got onto this really recently when I ran the Olympic trials in 2020, because Gary Corbett put together a history of American-born Black female marathoners that have run the fastest times. And I had no idea that this thing even existed, this history even existed. I had never heard about really many other Black female marathoners beyond obviously Alafine and Sally Kipyego. But so it was really new and eye-opening, and it was amazing to me that there was this still there's constantly this uncovering of history and stories from other people. And so I really just encourage people to seek out those stories, not only in the running realm, but even when we're thinking about books about or resources about people's experiences in nature, because really trail running is a form of us communing in nature, and it's just a different form than what maybe many other people would do. But if we look at some of these resources, we may find that actually a lot of people are experiencing nature in a variety of ways, and we can sort of use that to tie it into running. And so a couple of books that I've read that are really great. One is Black Faces, White Spaces by Kiera Finney. And she does this really beautiful job of basically uncovering the African-American experience with the environment and the outdoors and what that means. And then also James Edward Mills, who wrote the book, The Adventure Gap, about his experience with the first all-Black team of climbers climbing Denali. So both really beautiful, and yeah, just I think you gain a lot of insight from just listening and hearing these stories, and maybe uncovering some biases. Sorry, that was long-winded.
All good. Anyone else?
Can you rephrase the question one more time?
Yeah, so how can individuals work on their own biases or maybe even racism in order to even approach this work, in order to even reach out to different groups to get them to, you know, interested in trail running or interested in their products, et cetera?
Getting to know your communities better, wherever you are located. Say you have like a Muslim American community nearby, or you know, an Asian community nearby, you know, knock on our doors. It's okay. We won't, you know, we won't eat you. You know, we're harmless, and just, you know, approach us and say, hey, how can we get your community more involved? Or you know, learn more about our communities and see how that can fit into your own, if you're a race director, how that can fit into your own race. Also, I've got to say, for other runners, like if you see somebody being bullied, step up, do something about it. I mean, as a visibly Muslim woman, I can't tell you how many times I've been bullied during a run, even in races. Like one time I had a white guy chasing me during a 10K run, preaching to me about Jesus. And I'm just like, what is going on here? You know, this is crazy. And other runners were running by, and without any headphones, I can see them looking at this, you know, this altercation that's going on, and nobody did anything about it. So for the other runners out here and the attendees, you know, if you see somebody being bullied, do something about it. I mean, you know, you have to be on our side too, and you have to actually take action, you know, not just sit there and listen. So I think that's also something more runners can do, whether you're road or trail, anything.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Even, you know, when you see bullying, but even when you hear your close friends and family members say things and you're like, oh,
yes,
that sound, you know, instead of just keeping it to yourself or just instead of laughing it off, be very intentional to call them in and acknowledge the harm that may be happening just by their words alone.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in this country where Islamophobia is on the rise, and you know, tackling stereotypes about the Muslim community, and it's especially after 9/11 has been really harmful for my community. I mean, I can tell you how many visibly Muslim women were chased or harmed. I can go on and on and on about that, but I'm not going to. But you know, stepping up and you know, speaking out against that is really important too. I think you know, that's just something runners, in whether you're joining a club, that's why I don't go to, you know, clubs anymore and run, because it's just, I don't feel like anyone's truly on my side.
Wow.
So
we need to help change that. Yeah. So one last question here. What's one thing you'd like to see from the running industry, right? The brands, the retailers, the clubs?
I like to see total, I call it comprehensive inclusivity, whereas, you know, we're looking at issues of race, gender identification, size, economic status, you know, and yeah, it's for me, it's easy to say like, oh, we got to talk to the brands, but you know, I feel like, you know, like making a point, and I think Rahaf was just saying, and Kiera, you were just saying too, like talking to your, you know, like to your friends as well. A lot of us, or some of us, know people who work for brands, or know, so like running's like a small community. So like the degrees of separation, Kevin Bacon style, are like 2. You know, like you can talk to someone who is like, can talk to someone who's at a brand, or you could talk to someone who works for a publication or whatever. And like, you know, try to work and explain to those people. Don't be scared to offend someone because you don't want to get cut off from the free pair of sneakers or the hat or whatever, because that's what happens. Like you meet somebody that works for said brand, they're your friend, or they come to your run club. I know because they come to our run club, they hook you up with some stuff. And like, you don't want to offend said person, you know, with like a real issue. You want to keep like the pipeline of like goodies coming down. So you might be a little hesitant, and sure, it's easier, you know, for me to say, because I know a lot of people, but having those conversations with the people who you know that work at the brands, regardless of what their position is. Like I work for a major athletic corporation. You know, I work for Foot Locker corporate. So like I'm not calling any shots, opening or closing any stores. But like, you know, like if you come to me with something that Foot Locker could be doing, and maybe I can run it up, you know, through the company, through the right channels, to the people who can actually, you know, make a difference. You know, like sometimes it's easy to, you know, we got to attack some of these problems and issues from all sides, shoot for the top, but then sometimes hit the people on the, shoot's not the right word I want to use, but like, you know, aim for the top, and then, you know, also focus your, you know, efforts on the people who are on the ground running, no pun intended. And so, you know, maybe some of those, you know, those conversations can turn into actions that can turn into results.
Yeah. I would just add really quickly is, especially for brands, retailers, clubs, you know, RDC, we focus on representation, right? And so when you get off this call, go through your social media. When's the last time you had a person, underrepresented runner featured? When's the last time you had an underrepresented runner who became an athlete? What's the makeup of your athlete groups? What's the makeup of, you know, your social media, your website, the content you're dishing out? Because we're talking about representation. And so we want runners to see that these brands are for us, and these brands are going to help us get into trail running, or help, you know, take our experiences with trail to the next level. So that's like one small, easy example. And then having these conversations internally, right? It's not enough to just join these panel discussions and read articles. That's fantastic. Continue to have these conversations, even when it's not, you know, we're talking about DEI, racial justice. If you're in your sales call, you're in your product call, it is important, and it needs to be integrated into everything. And so I just wanted to add that as well.
What can I just come in on that as well, about that, on that representation point? What's crucial is that representation is authentic, right? We don't want to see how brands think black and brown people want to be represented in their feeds and in their marketing. It has to be authentic from black people, right? And that's something that I was so grateful for Patagonia for. I can see Sasha's dropped a link to Run to the Source, but what was amazing about that film, we came to that, and you know, Patagonia make wonderful trail running films and films in general, but we were really determined to ensure that the story was told through black eyes and through black voices. And you know, Patagonia allowed us to appoint a black director, a wonderfully talented Matt Kay, and the whole crew that took part in the film were from ethnic minority groups. That I feel that the resulting film is an authentic piece, right? Because it was made in that way. So I think that's a really important point to make on that representation piece.
Well, can I jump in again real quick? I think that was such a great point. Out of college, I worked for a basketball company that focused on street ball. And for those who aren't familiar with street ball, it's like urban playground basketball. And so when I started working there, I was expecting that everyone who worked for this company was from, you know, an urban street ball sort of setting. And that was not the case. Like it was, you know, like Martin was saying, like you're telling, you know, the Black community what you think that we should be feeling or doing or saying or how we should be performing. But the people who are like making these decisions weren't from that community. It was just so mind-boggling to me, you know. And I was in like my 4th year there before someone finally was like, "Oh yeah, you're from West Philly. What do you think about such and such?" And I'm like, it's the authentic piece is so crucial, you know, the representation piece with like jobs and, you know, like that's important, but the authentic piece is so critical. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, that was great. So we are at 2:00. So one quick announcement, and then we're going to do this quick lightning round and everyone can participate. What RIDC is focused on next, and super excited to share it here on this call, is we're going to do a new research project soon that focuses on access, inclusion, belonging in trail and road running, as well as unmet product needs. So we already have a research project underway, and that is focusing on the current state of diversity with regards to road running and participation and employment in the running industry. And now we'll add this second research project that will focus on access, inclusion, belonging with trail and running and unmet product needs. And so that research project is supported by Ultra, Brooks, On, Patagonia, Salomon, Saucony, Smartwool, and Strava. And so these brands are joining us to get this data and have this information available to the industry so that we can also make informed decisions, both with qualitative and quantitative data. So I just wanted to share that, and that is on the RIDC website, the Running Diversity website. It's the research objectives, it's the team behind the research, and it's ways that everyone on this call can help us in getting this data for the industry. Everybody ready for a lightning round? All right, and then everyone in the chat, you ready as well? So I would just say thank you so much for joining us in this important conversation. We hope that it is not the last time that you have this discussion. We hope to see you at more events, more conversations that help us move the needle in this area. So really quick lightning round. It's so quick that if you don't answer fast enough, we got to move on. One thing you can't run the trails without. 5, 4.
My
cat.
advisor.
Pair of shorts, I guess.
Chewing gum.
That's true.
Hydration.
Oh yeah, that's
Okay.
a good one.
All right. Your favorite, most beautiful trail, whether you've been on it or you've seen it and you hope to get on it one day.
Oh man.
That's hard.
There was a trail in Oregon. I did hit the coast twice, and there was this trail in Oregon, like in Bend, Oregon, or somewhere like that, kind of off the like main course of the actual race. That is I would move to Oregon if I could. Don't tell anybody from Philly. Anybody from Philly, don't pay attention to that. I would move to Oregon if I could.
Anyone else, really quickly?
Somebody mentioned Pictured Rocks Trails in the UP of Michigan. You guys have to go. It's absolutely stunning.
Yosemite, so many good ones. Oh my goodness. Appalachian Trail is always a treat.
Rachel
Yeah.
caught me.
Okay, music or podcast, or no music or podcast, or it depends.
Both. It depends on the
Music.
day. but
Yeah.
both.
Music.
Music.
Mhm. Sure.
Okay. All right, last one. What's one new thing or what was a refresher for you today on this panel? One new thing you learned or what was a refresher for you from today's conversation?
Representation.
Oh,
go
yeah, sorry, go.
Rahaf, go.
Representation matters, but not when you're using us. So not tokenism.
That ding went off at the perfect time.
Yeah, it really did.
Sorry
It
about
really
that.
did.
That part, yeah. Martin.
Yeah, I think just a reminder that there's still a lot of work to be done. So yeah, we need to keep plugging away.
Brodie.
I think tokenism is something that I'm going to take away. I mean, I've been reading the chats, and the chats are on fire. It's that's high level content right there. But the word tokenism, I've never heard that word until today, and I can definitely see a difference between inclusion and that. So it's something that I'm definitely going to be considering heavy going forward.
Peyton.
I learned a lot about Rahaf's experience in the immigrant community. That was really insightful, and you really don't get to hear a lot of those stories in this space. So it was really beautiful. Thanks, Rahaf.
No problem. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, yeah. I would just add that there are so many people willing to do this work and willing to move from listening and having a conversation to action and transformative change to diversify every aspect of the running industry. And so thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for your time, your expertise. We really appreciate it, and want to thank Patagonia Trail Running Team and obviously the crew at RIDC. Again, if you go to our website, runningdiversity.com, you'll learn about the research projects we have going on, and we need everyone. That's one good example of action and next steps. So thank you. If I forgot anything, charge it to my heart, charge it to my head, not my heart. I love how there's still over 100 people online even after we're 6 minutes over.
No, we good. We good. We can be here all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was it for the lightning round. And so thank you, everyone. Super excited to engage with you all going forward. We'll probably post on RIDC's Instagram and LinkedIn, as well as Patagonia Trail Running accounts. Would love to, if you want to keep the conversation going there, please do. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kiera.
Thank you all so much.
Comments still coming in. Don't want to
Yeah.
end this meeting for all yet.
The chat is hopping. Hopping.
Definitely the most engaging chat I've been on
Yeah.
a panel so far.
Conversations are so
Absolutely.
important. I know for some of us, it may feel like we're always having this conversation, but
Yeah.
there's so many more people who we need involved in this conversation. There's so many phases and levels to this work. There is no end date for talking about this. There is no end date when we'll, all of this will go away, but can we move the needle? Can we make progress? Can we impact not only all of us who's here, but also the next generation after us? So
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
all right, I don't want to hold the panel hostage. But thanks everyone, and this will be available on RIDC's YouTube channel.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
all.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.